Hello, my name is Simon. Welcome to Why Is That, a free speech platform where we explore big ideas and the controversies of our time. Hello, beloveds, and welcome back to another episode of Why Is That? A lot of people don't know about the men's rights movement. Why is that? Last week was the New Zealand premiere of the Red Pill documentary covering, done by a feminist, Cassie J, about the men's rights movement. I'd say looking at the topic changed her whole entire worldview. Joining us today is Warren Preiss from Relational Wairarapa, who organised the showing of the Red Pill in New Zealand. Hello, Warren.
Hi there, Simon.
So what made you want to screen the Red Pill documentary?
Well, I've known about it, I guess, for probably a little over a year since the preview was first released on YouTube. I was incredibly excited seeing that little preview, and every time I showed it to someone who hadn't heard of it or knew nothing about the men's rights movement in general, the response was always incredibly emotional and very positive and surprised. And so that just every time that happened, I felt more excited about the film. And when it was released, I thought, well, is there going to be a New Zealand screening? I was hoping it might happen. Nothing was coming up, so I sent an email over and said, well, how do we do this? How do we go about it? And found out it wasn't too arduous a process. Just had to hire the screener and the licensing rights and so on. And so it was just one of those things I felt I had no option really other than just do what felt the right thing to do. Just to screen something that I thought was a very important perspective, and people would appreciate it. Seeing a point of view you don't often see or hear in the media.
I came across the men's rights movement during a time, I don't know if it's a general term, but they talk about the disposable male.
Absolutely.
A time after I'd been disposed of. So when Karen Strawn, who we've had on the show, she did a thing on disposable male, and that sort of led me into it. Yes, but it's something that's not nobody knows about it in New Zealand unless you're
particularly interested.
Yeah, well, if you're online, in certain online circles.
Absolutely, yeah. Having said that, I have sensed there is an increasing number of men out there, obviously having access online, beginning to find each other, beginning to see that their perspective is valid. They are human beings, and finding each other gives them courage, gives them a sense of camaraderie and togetherness. And then as soon as two people talk together, a taboo or something that was previously never spoken about all of a sudden becomes a topic that's on the table. And my sense is that there's just so many men around today who are ready and excited about talking with each other and finding out what sharing their experiences of being a man in the modern world, and owning up, not owning up, that's not the right word, acknowledging the difficulties and the challenges, and working forward in a way that's not just about flagellating yourself as a bad man, but realizing fundamentally we're not bad. No group of human beings are inherently evil, and so I think there's a lot of guys who are starting to see that, and it's very heartening to hear, to see a film that's dedicated to that perspective.
Because a lot of people are like, well, what do you mean? But a lot of
what do you mean? Guys have it easy. Yeah. That might be the kind of often parroted perspective, but a lot of guys know that. Well, a lot of guys don't have it easy. In fact, the suicide rate is, on average, I think roughly 3 times the rate for men. Well, life expectancy is an interesting area where generally around the Western world men die 6 or so years earlier than women.
Because just going back to the suicide, there was an article in the New Zealand Herald which somebody posted, and it was talking about New Zealand suicide rates and how men have gone slightly down, women have gone up, which is bad, and it is bad, but, you know, it's like, and young people are still vulnerable and Maori, and it's like, well, if you look at the statistics...
They didn't acknowledge the disparity between men and...
It's like men are 3 times higher than women across all age ranges, from childhood to the elderly. The male suicide rate is 3 times higher, and... it's if you're having an honest look at the statistics, the biggest group by far is men, but of course it was women, children, and ethnic minorities. Where, frankly, if it wasn't for a lot of white feminists trying to shut it down, a whole lot of Maori men would probably still be alive. We could... Because there's the oppression Olympics, you know, like, are you saying men are more oppressed than women? And it's like, well... Yeah. I'm not really saying women are oppressed, and generally, and, you know, people from various backgrounds have various issues.
Yes.
And I notice, every time you try to talk about men's issues with women, it's just like, you know, they don't want to hear it.
Yeah, well, I think the thing is, it's become popular, I suppose, especially in the last 30 years, to the identity politics procedure of talking about people as belonging to groups, and this person in this group is likely to be this because they're in this group. But we know, and intuitively we know in ourselves and our experiences that our lived experiences are all unique. And this, as you said about the oppression Olympics, of course, the idea of having people in groups, and there's the oppressor and the oppressed, is a kind of very simplistic, almost childlike view of the complexity of human interactions, and I think it's been great in creating a lot of divisiveness around the world, which is, but it hasn't been helping in creating understanding, because as soon as you feel, or someone says, well, you're a this, so therefore your experience must be this, you've completely annihilated the possibility of any genuine contact with that person.
Often funny how they talk about privilege when a lot of this stuff comes from academia, from upper middle class academics who have very little idea about the working class experience. So.
Absolutely, yeah. I tend to, think of social theory as what happens in the absence of a genuine social life, or genuine relationships, because these are things that theories tend not to fit very well into. Human beings are all very complex, and unless you actually know them and connect with them, you can't predict their stories. So,
because there's a lot of reality that's denied. Like, what's her name? Erin Pizzey, who founded...
Erin Pizzey, absolutely.
The women's rights... the women's refuge...
Women's refuge shelters in UK.
Yeah, which spread internationally. She basically got drummed out of the feminist movement for saying, well, women can be equally violent as men in domestic relationships. Right. A lot of studies have shown 50-50 for domestic violence, but in the Anglosphere, in New Zealand, Australia, UK, America, Canada, they operate under what's called the Duluth model, which says that only men can be violent. So
only violence can be perpetrated by men, and only all forms of domination can be perpetrated by men, which is absurd, obviously.
And so, in terms of domestic violence, it's perfectly legal for women to assault men.
Well, that's the implication, because they wouldn't be assaulting them if they're not capable of doing it. It's interesting how Erin Pizzey describes her experiences working with women in the shelters in the UK, and all of the women acknowledge that they also are violent, or nearly all of them that were in the shelters. And her observation is that violent relationships are a generational, learned relationship style since childhood, being raised in violent families, and that almost, invariably, the dynamics of violence is played out by both partners, by the men and the women, or two men or two women in gay relationships. So she just observed that outright, and she couldn't just pretend that wasn't there.
Because that was her family background, wasn't it?
That's right.
Like her parents, she said she had times when her father would hit her mother, and other times when her mother would lay into her father. Right. Yeah, it's. But
it makes sense that it would be like that.
Oh yeah.
That a child being raised in a family like that would learn that dynamic and be more likely to enter into a relationship with an adult and recreate the similar dynamic.
So in terms of breaking the cycle of family violence, until we recognise women can be violent, it's never going to happen.
Breaking the cycle would obviously have to involve stopping those children from experiencing those kind of childhoods, and somehow helping couples learn not to stop that engaging style they have with each other.
Yeah, because I've said this many times in the show, men love women. But, if you're from, a young age, growing up in that type of household,
you'll do what you've been taught.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Erin Pizzi's in the Red Pill, isn't she?
She is, yeah. She's in there for an interview, yeah. No, it was a very, very well put together documentary interviewing a broad range of people from both sides of the fence, different perspectives.
Because it's just, even though it's on the men's rights movement, but it's got equal representation from feminists, is that right?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure of the exact amount of time devoted in terms of interviews, but she does absolutely well represent the feminist perspective and, the perspective of just plain out disagreeing with the men's human rights movement's perspective. And she presents both of those sides of the coin quite well, and it makes a compelling viewing for 2 hours, definitely.
So with your work for Relational Wairarapa, how, because we were talking about before the show, what role does sort of men's issues play in that?
Well, I guess I've always been passionate about the way human beings relate, and being a man, I suppose I've always been interested in understanding my fellow men and fellow humankind in general. And I guess the idea of men's groups always appealed to me, just because it's so rare that men really get together and talk about their issues, or that they have the kind of things that men like to do together are seeming to get fewer and further between. Things like scouts, and as a kid growing up, a lot of the activities that we wanted to do as teenagers in high school were kind of pushed to the side, such as we wanted to do a rowing trip around the Lake Taupo when we were 16, and we were all supported up to a point, but then the plug got pulled at a certain point. So there's a lot of things that guys struggle to sort of get together and do the things they like to do, and so
we see a lot of institutions becoming very feminized, like the education and psychology, and and workplaces as well. Guys often feel like they have to tread on eggshells. There's not apart from sports, I suppose, rugby and so on. It's for men to sort of express their natural, boisterous, masculine energy is, for a lot of guys, quite difficult, especially if you're not into sports. I mean, I was never into rugby. My dad was Austrian, so he never played rugby. So that wasn't an avenue for me. And so, I've always hungered this opportunity to be comfortable in
who I am, and also in my masculinity, or those aspects in me that I sort of felt, modern day society doesn't particularly like me to show those sides of me. So I've dialed them back a wee bit, but they're there and they want to come out. They want to be more relaxed. I want to be able to sit on a train and not have to hold my legs together. But just be okay with who I am and just my physiology and so on.
Because you bring up a good point, because there was a whole thing in America, and it was on the Daily Show and things like that about manspreading, about men sitting with their legs apart, and I was finding
so abhorrent,
just finding in New Zealand a lot of these issues, including the gender pay gap thing, are being imported from overseas. I mean, these aren't homegrown issues.
Right. There are certain vested interests that are wanting to put them out.
And I think it's different from something like the men's rights movement, which I came across because it really relates to my personal experience, and a lot of guys, as you've said, you've talked, but a lot of these things that are being imported overseas that are causing trouble aren't. Sure. They're very ideological, originating from the upper middle class academics I mentioned before.
I would believe so. I mean, I just saw a little clip from a screenshot from a education program in Australia, and the words were something along the lines of men have historically been the greatest threat to women and girls, and that was in schools. It was a program in schools in Australia. I don't know if that was just one clip from the program, but as you say, these are the kind of things that just are sort of subtly slipped into our education and our media and so on. Especially the domestic violence issue, which is, are you man enough to stop violence against women? Things like that. Yeah. So there's obviously an agenda there from certain perspectives that would rather it were considered to be a gendered issue.
Because there is the distortion of history. People aren't generally aware. About 70% of divorces are initiated by women, and even back to Victoria times, it was 60%. And but people have this idea that men just, the wives were his property, and even somebody. They were making fun of him, but he had a clip. He's quite a popular progressive person, but going on about how about 100 years ago women were like chattel type slaves in the West. That are like, are you kidding me? But I'm pretty sure he was serious. But he would have been told that and believed that. Yeah. But no basis in reality whatsoever.
No, I mean, I wasn't there to know for sure, but everything I've seen indicates women were, pretty well looked after throughout, recent Western history. I mean, that's just my, you look at the life expectancy rates, they live, reasonably comfortable lives in comparison to a lot of the men who are out in the coal mines or on the war front. So, but again, that's that portrayal of men as doing everything from the perspective of patriarchy and ownership and power, rather than considering that men are, working hard to protect and provide and build the infrastructure, maintain the technology, allow women to pursue their interests and not have to dig coal out of holes in the ground.
I worked in construction. The only time there was a woman on site was when the team of 3 architects came through, and one of them was a woman.
Sure.
Because just, most of the work is, so manual, and men are about 30 to 40% stronger in muscle mass than women.
Sure, that's right.
It's just because with the whole pay gap thing, I mean, the Ministry of Women, with the new pay gap legislation that came through, even admits most of it's just down to choice. Sure. Well, we want to close that gap, but even though
closing that gap would mean expecting women to do the bulk of the work in society, wouldn't it? I mean,
and change that. change their choices.
And why would women want to do all that work when there's men willing to do it in order to look after them and provide them with a, slightly more comfortable life? It doesn't make sense.
Because it was interesting, around a lot of people, women's suffrage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it wasn't too long before women got the vote in New Zealand, which is the first country that men got the vote universally. It was all landholders, and there was universal Maori suffrage beforehand, but women got the vote, but they didn't take on any additional things, like they weren't military draft, bucket brigades. It's a very fascinating historical view, but it's not recognised. It's just like there was discrimination against women. It's and a lot of this twisted history serves just to, in the present day, sweep over that men can have issues that aren't addressed.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I believe you're right. It is. It wouldn't be difficult. Wouldn't be easy to go back on however many years of portraying men as the oppressors, to then have to retract your steps and say, well, hey, actually, sorry. When we actually look at it, we see that men are actually, on the whole, working in tough jobs, getting killed in tough jobs. The workplace death rate is more like 95% for men compared to women. It wouldn't be easy for a lot of these people who have, I guess, they've played in on that natural biological drive to protect girls and women, and which makes sense from a reproductive point of view. They've played in on that capacity and tendency in men to protect and care for women, and manipulated it outright, I suppose, to bending over some more and saying, yeah, we're sorry even more, and take some more from us, and then to acknowledge that well, actually, yeah, we were wrong, and men on the whole are working very hard and suffering, and it's going to be horrendous to have to go back on your steps, and that's why I suppose there's a lot of resistance to these things.
I think there was a lot more understanding of society about that until feminism came in you're oppressed and they're oppressing you, and of course if they're oppressing you, who cares what their issues and needs are?
Right.
They're the bad people.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. So yeah, as I was saying, when I started running these groups, it just was within, running a mixed group with a group of men and a group of women together, and talking about issues, talking about lives, and it was always very heartening to notice that in these groups, men would begin to express what they're going through, and almost universally, the women in the groups would be interested, and they would, their point of view on men would change just in being in these groups I was running, and they would question their assumptions about men being lazy or just this or that. If there's a problem and men are doing bad here, it's because they're lazy, or it's because they're unkind, or they're thoughtless, or they're just men, they're just brutes, and so on. And after running these groups for a while, men would start to talk about what was really going on in their lives and what they were really struggling with. And I saw change starting to happen. And everyone would go away at the end of the 2-hour groups with a smile on their faces. No one felt like, not all the time, a couple of times some people got a bit triggered, but on the whole, the experience in running these groups has been that when people actually come down and they leave the sort of ivory towers of ideology and, as you said, the sort of education, the higher education instilled mindsets and the narratives, people warm to one another, and that's why I've been wanting to run these groups, and so get people to watch a film like A Red Pill. They come away at the end of that movie and they're not filled with hate. You know, they don't feel they've sat and watched 2 hours of hate. They actually feel compassion. They feel like they're a better human being for having seen it. So, that's why I love doing this.
Yes, with the documentary, there's been a number of people that have tried to shut it down. In Australia, there was a petition, and always from feminist groups. And it's like, well, why can't you trust people can watch, the men's rights movement, perspectives, and if they're so horrible,
right?
Why can't you trust people's good judgment?
Sure. Let the horribleness be self-evident. Let it speak for itself. Yeah.
But just as we've been talking about, it's like some of the things like, oh, men are human, they're not horrible, etc. It's just this demonization that has happened. I mean, a lot of women, it's not like, well, no, women have to realize we've got it worse than you. It's like, oh, we just want it to be recognized. Both men and women have issues, and we know women have issues, and we're very sensitive to that.
Absolutely.
Because if, like, feminists say, like, men oppress women, it's like, well, why would we care about anything you have to say? But they rely on men's natural instinct to, want to look after women.
Yeah. I think it's probably been, a lot of the harm was done in schools, right from the 80s. I remember the posters that said girls can do anything.
Oh, I had Helen Clark come to my intermediate school to say that.
Right, you did. Yeah, we just had the posters, but I remember even at the time there was a kind of, even as a little boy of 7 or 8 or so, I was aware that it did produce a result in the sense that some of the girls would be a bit smug, and they'd feel a bit like, I can be a little bit, snarky and, smug and a little bit, put my hands on my hips, I'm this, and it didn't feel right to me as a child that, well, is this helpful? That was my gut response as a child. How is this helpful? And I don't think it's helpful. I think what happens is, over the years of being in that environment, and then we had in high school sexual harassment, and we were told pretty much that as boys, we had to be very careful not to look at a girl in the eyes too long, and not to, just generally make sure we didn't do anything that could be possibly decreed sexual harassment. And these kind of things, on an ongoing basis over a young human's developmental period, will leave as an end result with a woman feeling perhaps that that they are oppressed, and that they're valid to believe this, and that they can get away with using this power that they've been given by saying, well, you're doing this or you're doing that, or and I believe it just brings out a side in people that they won't ultimately feel good about. They won't ultimately feel connected with their peers in behaving in this way. And that's what I sort of see when people watch a movie like this, or they come to one of these groups. It's better. It's actually more of a rewarding experience to see the person next to you as a human and as a conscious being just like yourself that has all kinds of things going on. It's better it's more rewarding to connect with other human beings in that way than it is to sort of have a picture of a narrative of who they are, and as you say, that they're the oppressor. Although it may have some kind of payoff, ultimately I don't think it's as rewarding.
Okay, we're just about out of time. We'll continue this next week. Thank you again for Warren Preiss from Relational Wairarapa. Where can we find you?
Oh, thanks, Simon. If you look on Facebook, just facebook.com/relational, and you can send a message there about some of the groups that we're running. So if you're down in the Wairarapa or Hutt Valley region, love to have you along on a group.
And as it's the season, Merry Christmas, everyone.
Merry Christmas.